Okay, we're back and we are going to finish up soldering the display board for the Nixie chess set. Let's zoom in. And this basically I'm just going to be finishing up the soldering, making sure all of the solder points are done well, and then I will be putting in those. Well, I'll put on this piece too, but I will put on these little pins which hold the Nixie tube. And I'm going to go ahead and point out really quick, if I can grab these tweezers, point out that I basically pre-cut the tail off of this using my Dremel, just with a cutting disc. It makes it pretty easy to slip into the holes in the PCB in these little holes, and once those tails are cut off, it just fits perfectly in there. It's nice and snug. They don't move, and I can very freely solder without having to worry about those pins doing anything that I don't want them to. So without getting too long-winded, I'm going to go ahead and start soldering all these little bits. So I was actually pretty nervous before starting this project because of all of the surface components, which I had never really worked with before. I'd only really done through-hole components, which are a totally different animal. But after doing this, it's kind of amazing because it's really not as hard as it seems like it would be. And I've actually found that you know, in spite of the teeny tiny size, that I actually kind of like it better than the through-hole components. So call me crazy, but it's really not as bad as I thought it would be. Of course, I say that and now I'll probably make a humongous mistake while I'm doing this, but thus far, and I've done, let's see, 8, 9, 10, this will be my 11th piece, display piece, and I have not had any problems so far. So we shall see if that luck, or that skill, we'll see if that holds true. So basically just pretty simply making all the final soldering points. The one thing I would point out is I typically I try not to, well, let's see how to put this. So after the last video where I set the initial side, I then try to get the opposite side before I touch anywhere or any pads that are even connected to the first side, if that makes sense, because it is, you know, it doesn't take very much to re-liquefy the solder on the, you know, on the first part that I did, and so it's pretty easy to basically get the piece unadhered to the board. So definitely want to get the second side soldered before I do anything that may move the first side. Sure. Anyway, kind of rambling on, but so I've actually not been doing this type of work for very long, so all of this is actually pretty darn new to me, but I've been doing what I can to learn how all of this works, and it's actually a pretty fun hobby. You know, now that I've gotten more into it. No, the first project I did was just kind of like a learn how to solder project, and then after that I did a Nixie tube clock that I had purchased the kit from what's his name, Tortuga Scuba. That was his username. Anyway, did the Nixie tube clock, which was a pretty involved project, and I suppose you could say that I got hooked. So now I'm doing this project, which is equally involved, maybe not quite as complicated in terms of the circuitry and whatnot as the clock, but definitely a much larger project than the clock, with lots of components and the surface mount and all this stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. Okay, so now let's zoom out just a little bit, and I'm just gonna put these pins in the holes like I talked about earlier. One, let's make sure I do this right. One always goes in this pin here. Of course, it's going to make a liar out of me now. I've done 10 tubes already, or 10 boards, and I've not had a problem with any of them. Oh, there it goes. Okay, whew. And then this one goes here because I'm making the pawns or the minions for the white team. So there, the pins are in there, and they are pretty secure. So I can take my tweezers and try to wiggle it, and you can see that they barely move. So that is wonderful. Now I'm going to go ahead and solder them in place. They're a little bit harder to solder just because it's hard to get at them. There's this, you can see these little bits of you know, the soldering, or the pad that the solder will affix to. It's hard to get everything to line up properly. So I'm going to go ahead and get that centered so you can see what I'm doing. Go ahead and get my soldering iron in there, heating it up. I usually heat these up a little bit more just because it seems to help. There it goes. So once it's hot, then just run it along the base and it just flows right in. Same thing on this one. This one's a little bit different because I actually have to get a bridge from the pin to this little crescent shaped trace line. So that's actually the ground wire, so I have to get a big blob of solder to jump from there to there, which really isn't that hard, but sometimes you have to work it because it doesn't want to do it on its own. Oh, come on. There we go. A little bit bigger glob than I usually do, but that's okay. Looks like it works. So, I guess the next test, let's zoom out a little bit. Make sure that the tube actually slips in to the pins. Make sure I didn't get any bunch of solder in them or something like that. And they go in just fine. So, take this off. Zoom out. Let me take a quick look at it. I like to just make sure that everything's soldered and that everything is connected. I don't have anything, I guess, jumping, soldering from one point to another when it's not supposed to. So no shorting or anything like that. And this looks pretty good. We'll do a quick test. So I'm going to put this Nixie tube back on the display piece. So this isn't the total, the final. It'll actually have one of these pieces. It's like that, and you know, I'll probably end up painting this or doing something to distinguish between the dark and the light pieces. But then it just feels like, oops, I didn't. It looks like I missed. There. So I'll probably put in a third or maybe a fourth pin to make it a little bit more stable, but that gives you the general idea. And at the moment, I'm just trying to make sure that they work. And once I'm satisfied that they work, I will then put in the extra pins. I think I might not have enough of the pins, to be honest, so I may have to go buy some more parts to do that. So anyway, let's go ahead and put this all together, back together again. And then let's go ahead and plug in the board. Okay, and voila! It lights up just like it's supposed to. Oops, let's see. A little bit hard to see with, there we go, block that light. But I love the way the Nixie tubes look, very beautiful, looks like fire. Fire captured in a tube of glass. Anyway, so that piece is a success, and now I just have to make a bunch more. Can't think of how many I guess if I've done, this is 11, there's 32, so 21 more. No, not 21, I can't do math, 19 more. Anyway, so hope you enjoyed.